Welcome everybody. Thank you so much for coming. Welcome to this MSF storytelling event. Please note that this event is being recorded. So my name is Pam and I work in the Public Engagement and Association team for MSF UK. And myself and my team, we look after a lot of the events and outreach at MSF UK. I also have Charlotte and Katrina here who are part of my team. If you want to wave and say hello, Charlotte and Katrina.
Hello.
There they are. Okay, so in my team, we organise a lot of webinars about MSF, lots of online events, particularly during the pandemic, obviously, things have gone online. But we want to, with this storytelling event, try something a little bit different from your standard presentation events. And we know that storytelling events have really been growing in popularity in the last few years as a more personal and intimate way of conveying a message to an audience. Now, obviously, storytelling events are normally done in person, in a room, in a community centre, or maybe in the pub. Now, we can't do this. Well, yeah, beginning to be able to do this, but it's still, you know, a tricky time to be getting lots of people together. So we're doing it online, but we would like to make it as cozy and welcoming as we possibly can. So you are welcome to keep your cameras on while our speakers are speaking, so they have someone to speak to and we can see your face. Do keep on mute, but then feel free to unmute at the end of each of our speakers to give a round of applause, just to give them a bit of encouragement. So we are going to start in a couple of minutes, so feel free to pour yourself a drink, put your feet up and settle in for what will be an hour and a half of storytelling from around the world. Now, as you may know, MSF is a medical humanitarian organisation that works in over 70 countries around the world, delivering medical aid to those who need it most. We work in places of conflict, epidemics, natural and man-made disasters, and where people are excluded from access to healthcare. Now, I should point out that this year, 2021, is a particularly important year for us because MSF turns 50 this year. It's our 50th birthday. Because we were founded back in 1971 by just a handful of French doctors and journalists. And over the last 50 years, we have grown into a worldwide humanitarian organisation with over 45,000 staff in just 50 years. So those are the headlines, if you like, about MSF's work. However, today, I like to think we're going behind the headlines to hear what it's really like to work for MSF from the people that do. We have 5 storytellers of different professions and backgrounds. The only thing that links them is the fact that they have all worked or are still working for MSF. We've asked our 5 storytellers to reflect on the theme of second chances and tell us a story that occurred to them when given this theme connected with MSF. So this is an open space, as I said. Feel free to put any comments in the chat, give any feedback as we go along. On a technical note, it's best to view this event to select speaker view so you can see the speakers bigger on your screen. I think that's it from me. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our first storyteller. I'd also like to mention that you should see the biographies. We'll shortly put the biographies of the speakers in the chat so you can find out a bit more about them there. So our first speaker is Sarah Wookie. And to know a little bit more about what makes Sarah tick, her current idea of heaven is to wake up before her puppy does, and Sarah is looking forward to showing her puppy the seaside as soon as the puppy is old enough. So Sarah, if you are there and you would like to turn your camera on, take it away with the first story.
Can everybody see and hear me okay?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. I know I shouldn't care more about the prettier children, but this 2-year-old child was brought in by her parents and relations. They were a nomadic family. They lived out in the wilderness. They had travelled since early morning to get to the hospital, and night was falling as they arrived. She had, the father explained in broken Arabic, taken something that they normally use to get rid of ticks from their cattle. They didn't know exactly what it was that she had taken. They didn't know what the label said. The can was left behind, and it would take 24 hours for then a family member to go and get the can and bring it back to the hospital. So that was the information that we had. Now, I'm a UK GP. I retired about 5 years ago from full-time general practice in the UK and have worked with MSF on and on since then. And this was my third assignment. This camp, it was a refugee camp. It's still a refugee camp, and it was on the border of 2 African countries. I can't tell you which ones for reasons that I'll explain later. A lot of the medical and nursing care was carried out by local members of staff from the country that I was staying in. When the child arrived, she was deeply unconscious. She was breathing about 3 or 4 breaths every minute, and you and I are breathing about 12 or 15 breaths a minute. She was completely unresponsive. No matter what one did to her, there was absolutely no reaction. Now, our facilities are pretty basic in this hospital. When I say it's a hospital, it has some oxygen. When the generator's working, it makes the oxygen generators work. It has lighting, again, when the generator's working. I thought this child was probably going to die. I had not seen a child recover from that level of being that unconscious. I explained to the father as best as I could how worried I was for the child, and I told the boss of the camp that I was pretty sure that we were going to lose a child that night. If this was Europe, we would have access to an online database of poisons that would be able to let us know exactly what it was that was in the stuff that the child took. We would then know what symptoms to expect, what problems to expect, and we would be told how to address them. We'd have access to monitoring equipment. We'd be able to secure the child's airway. The child would be admitted to an intensive care unit and monitored very, very carefully, probably ventilated. We wouldn't have had to worry that our oxygen concentrator relied on a generator, which relied on spare parts being transported for 3 days across the desert to get to the camp, and rely on fuel that may or may not arrive, and that may or may not have been adulterated on its journey to the camp as well. But that night, we had a few things going for us. The generator was having a good hair day, and it stayed working all night. There was nobody else in our intensive care unit. Our intensive care unit, by the way, has 3 nurses to patients, as opposed to 3 nurses to 90 patients in the rest of the hospital. And it has a dedicated oxygen concentrator for each patient, and it has lights that stay on all night if the generator stays on all night. And we had the most dedicated nursing staff. They were just incredible. The instructions I gave were to watch the child breathing, and if the child went more than 5-10 seconds without taking a breath, they were to place a bag and mask over the child's nose and mouth and breathe for her. And doing that for 5-10 minutes is one thing. Doing that for hour after hour after hour is a completely different ballgame. Anyway, the child was indescribably beautiful. She was wearing jewelry appropriate to her tribe. Her mum was wearing the same jewelry. Her mum said absolutely nothing the entire time that she was there. I think she probably had no language in common with any of us. But what she did do was just hold a little bit of her child all night. Didn't matter which bit of her child she was holding, and she took enormous care to make sure that she wasn't in the way of any of us. But she was just there and silent, holding a bit of her kid. So 2 hours later, the child was still alive, which amazed me. 4 hours later, she was starting to breathe pretty well normally, although she was still deeply unconscious. By the following day, she was sitting up in bed drinking a cup of milk. And later on that day, she got up. She just walked out of the hospital with her family without a backward glance. And anybody who's worked with sick kids will know that that's the best possible outcome you could wish for, is that a child just walks away without any care in the world. I wanted to write about her for the MSF magazine, but when I told my boss that that's what I wanted to do, the answer was a resounding, no, you can't. The government in the country that I was working in does not have a good relationship with this particular tribe. And if it got out that we had treated a member of this tribe, then our entire project could be in jeopardy. Now, our local staff were well aware of the local politics, and they could, I was an international staff member, I wouldn't have got into trouble, but they actually put themselves professionally on the line by going out of their way, treating this child, knowing that it could have got them into trouble, and not one of them hesitated for a second. And I can't tell you how proud of them I was. That's my story. I got a second chance at a different type of job from being a UK GP, and the kid got a second chance as well. I have got 1 or 2 pictures that can show you what it was like in the refugee camp. So that was the entrance to our camp. And this is what the refugees lived in. So they built them themselves, they maintained them themselves. They grew fruit and vegetables in little plots around the huts. That's one of the ladies, completely unrelated to the story I've just given you, but I thought she was so beautiful I wanted to take a photo of her, and she does know that this photo is being shared. That's the kids in the camp made a model of the village, of the camp village, out of mud and sticks and paper, and I thought that was just so fantastic. You can see they've even made little mud models of the MSF vans. I thought that was fantastic, and the local people are very tall compared with me. So I just took that picture as well. I had that picture taken as well. Okay, thank you very much indeed for listening to me.
Thank you, Sarah. A round of applause for Sarah. Fantastic story. Thank you so much, Sarah. I particularly liked that, you know, the leaving without a backward glance as the best outcome for that a doctor can hope for. And also, you know, you talk about that, that's a fantastic working example of MSF's neutrality, you know, treating everybody. It's just all about need, regardless of what side of the conflict they're on. So that's really fascinating. Before we move on to our next speaker, I just had one question I'd like to ask you, Sarah, and that is, you mentioned that you've had a career as a GP and then come on to work for MSF. Can you tell us a little bit more about that, and how, you know, how has that been a great move for you, and how has that been?
I was really, really pleased I did it. I could have stayed on in general practice for another few years, and I thought, actually, why not do something a bit different? And I was worried I was going to be too old to do it. But in fact, everybody has been very welcoming, very accepting, and I had the most astonishing experiences. And I think basically it's the sort of thing that I think anybody can do after they've had one career, is do another bit of another career.
Fantastic. Are you hoping to do more projects with MSF?
Possibly. I'm not quite sure.
Mm-hmm. Great.
Yeah, probably.
Come on. We'd love you to. Okay, thank you again, Sarah. A round of applause again for Sarah. Thank you. Okay, so we are going to move on now to our second speaker. Now, our second speaker is also a doctor, and his name is Taher Al-Hussein, and he is a doctor from Syria, and he is going to tell us a bit about his own personal story, which is a pretty incredible story of second chances. So, an ideal way for Taher to spend his day would be sitting by the river with his parents, having tea together. So take it away, Taher.
Thank you, Mom. Good evening, everyone. So I'm starting today's story in reverse, actually. So I'm going to start it here in the UK, specifically at Yeovil District Hospital's ICU department. So it was us junior doctors. We were sitting down in the doctor's mess, watching the COVID tsunami hit the Italian hospitals, and then watching all the chaos and fear that followed. And then questions like, what's going to happen? When is it going to hit us? Will we be able to manage the pressure that comes with it? Will we survive the illness if we caught it? And then all of a sudden I thought, these questions were all too familiar to me. I'm sure I've starred in this movie before, 9 years ago, in Al-Raqqa National Hospital in Syria. I had just graduated med school. I was excited to finally be able to treat patients, change their lives for the better. I had gotten accepted at a plastic surgery training program, which made my father, which made me my father's favorite son at last. But at the same time, the war had already hit multiple Syrian cities. And we were once again sitting at the doctor's mess in Syria, this time, watching other cities get bombed and all the fear and the chaos that followed. And then again, we were wondering, when was it going to be our turn? Will we be able to manage the pressure that awaits us? Will we survive? So what came to be was worse than any of us had imagined, actually. So war, or the fear of it, didn't stop people from getting sick. If anything, it accelerated it. The hospital was busier than ever. People from all across the governorate were pouring into Al-Raqqa city to seek refuge as the fighting between the rebels and the regime forces ravaged the countryside. I saw an average of 100 patients every day in the surgical emergencies department, and I kept on working until our house got bombed. When the rebels took over the city, so the city of Al-Raqqa, that's when we decided to move to the northern city of Tel Abyad, where I got in touch with MSF and started working for them. It was a welcome change from the chaos I had experienced at the National Hospital in Al-Raqqa city. MSF knew what they were doing and they seemed to have a plan. They refurbished an abandoned building into a hospital where we treated pediatric patients and turned an abandoned school into a clinic offering free treatments to the locals, who otherwise had to drive for long distances and pay large sums of money to get seen by a health professional. Working with MSF had always been something I've dreamt of, but never have I ever imagined working for them in my own country. And it was quite an experience, but then again, another fight erupted near the town of Tel Abyad where we were working. And working there has begun to become harder and harder every day. And then my brother got kidnapped, 18 days, and he was released. And when he was released, my family and I decided to relocate to Turkey permanently. Syria wasn't safe for us anymore. I still worked for MSF in Turkey, looking after pediatric patients that were too sick to be treated in Syria. And I remember there was once this premature infant the size of my palm. So he was that small. His father brought him to us, to the Turkish border. And then he asked us to look after the child since he was unable to get him help in Syria. And he wasn't able to accompany the child to Turkey. He still had to work and provide for the rest of his family in Syria. So he said he trusted us with his own life and with his son's life. So 3 months later, we called that man and asked him to come and collect his child, who had become the cutest, chubbiest baby I had ever looked after. I continued to work for MSF for 18 months in Turkey, then moved to the UK to do a master's in international health. When I arrived to the UK, a safe country, I slowly began to realize how scarred I was from everything I had seen. I had lost a lot, yet kept on functioning somehow, as resting and taking time off didn't feel right when many people around us still were suffering. But when I was in the UK, the suffering of others somehow became distant, and my own suffering started catching up to me. So I ended up applying for an asylum in the UK and accepting the fact that I was as vulnerable and damaged as those I had treated in Syria. I took some time off away from medicine and spent most of my time sitting by the ocean, taking in deep breaths and clearing up my mind to prepare for what's to come next. And when I was ready, I took the license exams to practice medicine here in the UK, passed them all, and then started working for the NHS in June 2018. A few months ago, I looked after a terminally ill cancer patient here at Yeovil Hospital, who was one of the nicest elderly ladies I had ever met in my life. She said on her last day with us that it was warming her heart that at her age and with her condition, she still managed to meet a kind person whom she felt safe with and, who made her feel safe and feel well looked after. And that's what keeps us going. That's why we're doctors. So I had my second chance from escaping the war in Syria and still managing to go back into practicing medicine here in the UK. Same goes for that little child who, if he had remained in Syria, he wouldn't have survived. And 3 months later, he was back into his father's arms. Thank you very much. I'll try to make it as brief as possible.
Thank you.
And we have some illustrations that you've done, which we'd like to show. If you want.
Oh, yes. I mean, most of my work was in the A&E department, so whenever I'm sat down, I just try doodling whatever the mood is on. So basically, when I first graduated, everything was colorful. And there were so many possibilities, and you can see I'm just drawing these lines, they're all colorful, and my life is heading in so many different ways. I just had to pick one of them. And then the war began and things started to darken, and it was as if we were looking into the unknown. So most of my doodles became as dark as this one. And then war started hitting our children. They become like that. And that was at one of the training courses at MSF. And naturally, I would just be doodling MSF stuff. And the last one is when I was in the UK. So I was, again, a refugee, sat on my own and looking to my right. So probably a good sign.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, what I found particularly fascinating about your story, Taya, is the fact that you had said you've always dreamed of working for MSF, but you never imagined that it would be working in your own country for MSF, because obviously it was a long time before the war when you were thinking of working for us. Yeah, incredible. How do you find practicing medicine in the NHS compared to elsewhere? And also, how do you find living in Yeovil, Somerset? So there's two questions.
So in comparison, we're very well resourced here in the UK. We're not running, I mean, we hardly run low on medical supplies or medication and everything. And also I tend to see much less patients here. I see one patient an hour on average here in the UK, while in Syria I used to see one patient every 5 minutes or every 10 minutes. So there's that. When it comes to life in Yeovil, it's been quite refreshing. Yeah, the countryside, and I have a balcony. I couldn't afford the balcony in London, but I have a balcony here in my place in Yeovil. That's all.
Sounds idyllic. Okay, thank you very much, Aya. Just to mention,
Yes.
time for questions at the end from the audience, we certainly will do. But we'll see, we need to go through the stories first. So thank you very much again. Okay, we are going to move on to our third speaker now. Our third speaker's name is Sam Joseph, and he is a nurse with MSF in Nigeria. Now, he unfortunately is having technical issues, but we knew the internet connection from where he's based in Nigeria was a bit unreliable. So we've thought of that And we have got him to record his 5-minute story as a video. So because Sam can't be with us today, we will show his video now. So his video is about his role as a NOMA nurse in Nigeria, and he will explain what NOMA is.
Hello everyone. I want to tell you a story titled My Second Chance. This is the story of a man who just wanted to be able to open and close his mouth. I'm talking about Kabiru from northwestern Nigeria, who had NOMA. NOMA disease is an acute gangrenous infection that affects the mouth, the nose, and the face. It has the potential to cause massive tissue destruction if not treated in good time. NOMA occurs primarily in malnourished or immunosuppressed children with poor oral hygiene between 1 and 6 years. If left untreated, NOMA has a mortality rate of up to 90%. My name is Joseph Samuel, popularly known as Sam. I have worked with this MSF NOMA project in various roles since 2015. I and my colleague have treated hundreds of NOMA patients in my time, but Kabiru sticks in my mind. Kabiru was for 3 years and had surgery with an international NGO years ago to treat his condition, but developed complication of trismus, that is mouth closure, months after the surgery due to lack of physiotherapy. Unfortunately, when he came back for a follow-up visit to the hospital in Sokoto in 2012, the visiting NGO stopped coming. He felt disappointed and left in tears because he had difficulties eating food, except for a liquid diet, leading to a loss of body weight. Fortunately, by 2014, MSF came on board to support NOMA patients and started doing surgeries in August 2015. This patient came back to the hospital in 2018, 7 years after the initial surgery. And to his delight, he was readmitted for trismus release surgery, now supported by MSF NOMA surgery project with a well-equipped physiotherapy unit. I am a nurse by profession, and my role was to coordinate his care in collaboration with other medical departments, including physiotherapy and mental health units. After the surgery, he had sessions of physiotherapy post-operatively and a continuous home management plan over the period of 6 months. The treatment plan worked out well with good compliance from the patient and a regular follow-up visits. The patient recovered well and his mouth opening was fully restored. He has since been discharged from the cohort. I and my colleague, who actively participated in his care, felt happy and encouraged by the outcome, that he was able to open his mouth again after 6 solid years of waiting. In his testimonies, Kabiru attributed his quality surgery outcome to physiotherapy service he got from MSF, which was not there in the surgery he got in the time past, thereby appreciating the second chance he had. This is one of the numerous testimonies we have received from patients who have been stigmatized in their communities, with no one to help them until they got free surgery from MSF and were reintegrated back to the society and doing well now with their families and businesses. He volunteered to speak to other patients during our quarterly surgical interventions to encourage them to use a story of second chance to motivate them on the importance of physiotherapy and follow up on home management plan for better outcome. He has said thank you to MSF many times for being able to open his mouth again. Thank you very much for listening to my story. It's a great privilege to be able to serve humanity. Many thanks to our donors worldwide. This success story and many more yet untold were possible because of your support for those you never know. Your support has been a big encouragement to us on the field. I love to serve humanity. Please, let's do it again. Thank you.
Great. Well, thank you to Sam. It's a shame he couldn't be here live because, yeah, he's really passionate about what he does. I forgot to mention that his ideal day would be watching comedy as Sam does stand-up in his spare time. So, yeah, I'm sure you'll agree that's really uplifting story about how MSF helps someone with such a simple thing as being able to open and close his mouth again. And to learn a bit more about the transformational nature of that No More Surgery project that really does change lives. So thank you to Sam. Okay, moving on. Our fourth speaker of the evening is Chris Peskett. Now, Chris is a nurse who has many years of experience working with MSF in over 20 assignments and is now, in fact, a member of the MSF UK Board of Trustees as well. And Chris's perfect day would be a leisurely walk along one of his local beaches, heading in the direction of a perfect meal of fish and chips by the sea. So take it away, Chris.
Okay, well, thank you very much, Pam, and good evening to everybody. Medically speaking, it's so unusual here in the UK that it might just get a mention in your local newspaper. Where MSF is often working, it's so common, it's just one of those things. Maybe your child gets it and survives. Maybe your child gets it and doesn't survive. Maybe your child gets it, survives, but is left with life-changing consequences. What am I talking about? Well, given that we're talking about MSF this evening, it could be one of any number of devastating diseases. However, I'm going to be speaking about meningitis. Meningitis is an inflammation of the meninges, the delicate layers that protect the brain and the spinal cord. The inflammation can be caused by viruses, by fungi, and by bacteria. And this evening, I'm going to talk about the bacterial form, meningococcal meningitis. It's a name that rolls beguilingly off the tongue, but I can tell you there is nothing beguiling about it for those it attacks, as you'll soon be hearing when I talk about a young lady I encountered in the Sudan. She, thanks to MSF, had her second chance. Many people do not get that possibility. In fact, it can kill up to 50% of people infected. And even those who survive it, some 10% can be left with permanent deafness or physical or mental disability. Most cases are found in the so-called meningitis belt that stretches from Senegal across Africa to Ethiopia. It generally comes between January and May and June when the rains arrive. Yeah? And during these dry and dusty months, the normally protective mucous membrane that lines the nose and the throat becomes particularly susceptible to infection. Yeah? And this is especially the case for babies, for children, and for young adults who are infected by other people coughing and sneezing. Now, my memory of this comes from my very first position working for MSF. Our team was setting up a permanent presence in a place called the Nuba Mountains. The Nuba Mountains is an area of land about 40 by 90 miles. It's fertile plains interspersed with rugged mountain chains and often made up of extinct volcanoes. It's home to about 1 million people, speaking an incredible 43 languages. But during my time there, some 300,000 people, and to put that in perspective, we're talking about the population of Newcastle upon Tyne, some 300,000 people had been forced, due to terrible insecurity, to flee the fertile plains and hide up in the mountains, where there is little or absolutely no access to health care. Now, we were still on the airstrip after having flown 400 miles to get to the Nuba Mountains when the welcoming committee told us that meningitis was rampaging through all the communities, causing untold suffering and death. And until our arrival, the only treatment available was traditional. So herbal remedies, prayers, and cutting the skin of the forehead and the neck in a desperate and forlorn, I have to say, forlorn attempt to try and reduce the terrible pain caused by the inflammation around the brain and the spinal cord. It only took a few days for word to get around that a medical team was on the ground. And I can tell you, within a few days, we were having countless people walking often 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 days, carrying their loved ones tied to their beds to reach our clinic. And I remember standing outside the clinic and watching the silhouettes of people carrying these beds, high up on the hills, gradually progressing down towards the clinic. And at night, also standing outside, watching a solitary lamp appearing and disappearing as the people made their way gingerly down the hillside. One such person brought to us was a young lady. She arrived with all the classical signs and symptoms of meningitis. Terrible headache, couldn't open her eyes because she was afraid to look at light, vomiting, becoming confused, very high fever. And when I lifted her head up, her whole body raised up at the same time, just as if I was lifting a plank of wood, a classic sign and a very bad sign. Well, immediately we gave her an antibiotic injection. Now, I'm sure a lot of you know that MSF is famous for its pioneering work, both with new medications, but also revitalizing, revamping traditional treatments. And in this case, to treat meningitis, we were using one of the very first antibiotics ever used, called chloramphenicol. However, many years before, it went out of favor because it does have some rare but extremely severe side effects: anemia and complications for young babies born to mothers taking the injection. However, it has the beautiful simplicity of only needing one injection. Can you imagine a disease like meningitis treated with one injection? And if one injection doesn't do the trick, then after 24, 48 hours, you just give a second injection. So in very limited settings, it's an incredible thing to be using. The next morning, I went to visit this lady. She was about the same as she had been when I first saw her the evening before. I couldn't stay with her or the other patients because myself and a few colleagues were setting off for a very long walk to a distant community to take chloramphenicol to train the health workers there how to use it. It was a long journey, 8 hours of walking. But during that time, I kept thinking about this lady and all the other people who had arrived the day before. Things, of course, hung in the balance for them. But at the same time, I was quietly confident, because I knew that they were in the hands of extremely capable and extremely dedicated clinic staff. 2 days later, we were making our return journey to the clinic. We were making our final descent down the hillside to the clinic. And who did we see coming up the path towards us but this young lady, carrying all her possessions, she was alone, and carrying her bed on her head. 2 days before, she was barely coherent. Now she was smiling from ear to ear. She was so happy she wanted to sing a small song of thank you to us, all the time with this very heavy wooden bed balanced on her head. I've worked with some 20 programs of MSF, so I know how effective the organization is in combating devastating diseases. But this memory that comes from my very first weeks for working with MSF, for me, epitomizes what MSF does so extremely well. Pioneering treatment given to a highly vulnerable population living in such an isolated setting. And to this day, I regret not taking a photograph of that lady singing her song with that bed on her head. But nevertheless, that memory stays as fresh with me now as if it were yesterday. And I hope in these few words I've been able to conjure up some of the magic of that moment for you also. Thank you very much.
We have a few photos to show us as well.
Yes, indeed, indeed.
Let's just get them up for you.
Yeah, so this is just a panoramic view from near we were staying. This is on the edge of the hills, looking over to the plains. In the distance, you can see a flat area. That's actually the airstrip. We had 8 airstrips. Because of the insecurity, we could never be certain where it was safe to land a plane. Yeah? You can see how beautiful it is. I mean, it'd be a backpacker's paradise, but backpackers were not going there then, and they're still not going there now because the insecurity tragically continues to this day. Okay, this is the first day of arrival. 5 tons of medical supplies we had to carry it up into the mountains. We had 280 ladies coming down to help us carrying it up into the hills. Okay, next, Pam. Okay, climbing up, you can see what it's like. It's unforgiving, yeah. Snakes are underneath these boulders, yeah. In the nighttime, you'll see many snakes coming out and basking on top of the boulders, yeah, to catch the heat. Yeah, very, very inhospitable landscape. Nobody wants to live here. They had no choice because they couldn't stay in the plains. It was just too dangerous. Okay, next. Okay, here's the clinic. Served a population in this area of about 80,000 people, half the population of my home city of Norwich. That's the best you're going to get. Yeah? That is a hospital in the Nuba Mountains, one of the very, very few hospitals serving the population. Okay, next. And here, go downscaling. These are the staff outside one of the health posts that we also set up and supplied with training and medical supplies. Yeah, this is one such community that we were heading for when we set off to take our supplies of the chloramphenicol. Okay, just a few pictures, but I hopefully giving you a small snapshot idea about what it's like in the Nuba Mountains. Beautiful, but very harsh and very difficult living conditions. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. A round of applause for Chris. What a fantastic talk. Thank you so much. What a wonderful story, so beautifully portrayed. I really like the way you described the mountains and also the silhouettes of the people. And I mean, what a miraculous recovery. You know, not only did your patient recover enough to go home, but you also saw her carrying her bed home. I mean, that's a pretty good recovery in my books. So thank you, Chris. Now, Chris does a lot of talks for MSF, a lot of talks. And as I mentioned, he's a board member. Could you tell us, Chris, just a few of the countries that you've been to when you've worked for MSF, and what motivates you to keep going out on projects for MSF?
Yes, well, that was my first program, as I mentioned, in Nuba Mountains. Actually, I've been there 5 times to Sudan and South Sudan, because I think wherever MSF is working, we have a very good reason to be there. But for me, this is the classic situation: a population deprived of any kind of healthcare. You know, without organizations like MSF, you know, the mortality would be truly awful. In fact, when I was there, about 1 in 5, sometimes 1 in 4 children did not get to the age of 5. I mean, this is a truly catastrophic number. And particularly in places like here, maybe in Afghanistan, the Democratic Republic of the Congo, this tragically is the reality for people living there. And why do I do this work? Well, I mean, look at me. I won't tell you my age. I'm getting on a little bit now, but I've had a good life. I mean, I've survived until now, hopefully a few more years ahead of me. I did that because, yeah, I had all my vaccinations. Whenever I got sick, my parents could take me to the GP the same day. I would get my treatment. I've had a good education. I haven't had to fear going outside my house, standing on a landmine, or being kidnapped, being shot. Yeah. So I've had I've been privileged to work for MSF, yeah, and to be a board member, an incredible privilege. But I've been privileged, I think, just by being born in the United Kingdom. Tragically, many people don't have that privilege, such as in the Nuba Mountains. And that's what's really motivated me to give a good number of my years to continue working for Médecins Sans Frontières, because I think working for the COVID vaccination program now. It's very important, and I'm very proud to be doing it. But I also think at the same time, those populations, well, talking about COVID, they haven't even seen a vaccination yet in the Nuba Mountains, yeah. And so when we look at the realities of life, it's good to be able to give something to people who haven't had the opportunities that I've had.
Lovely. And just to give us a bit of a breadth of where you've worked, you say you've worked in various countries in Africa. Have you worked on other continents?
Yes, so also I spent some time, particularly of HIV, tuberculosis. I've worked in Southeast Asia, so Myanmar, Cambodia. I spent a few years down there. I've also worked Afghanistan, Pakistan, often with malnutrition programs. This is another tragic situation. Acute malnutrition can kill up to 30 to 50% of children who get it. The treatment is so simple. There's a bit of peanut paste, costs 25 pence a packet. MSF makes it possible for hundreds of thousands of children in Asia, Southeast Asia, also of course in Africa, to get this peanut paste to give them a chance of another day of life, to survive.
Great, beautifully put. Thank you ever so much, Chris. Okay, so we are now moving on to our final speaker of the evening. And this is the fabulous Cara Brooks. Now, Cara is a project coordinator for MSF and has also, similar to Chris, been on many projects for MSF. When she's not working with the organisation, you will find her doing a yoga class and reading a good book on the sofa. So if you're ready, over to you, Cara.
Thanks. Hi, everyone. So in between the chaos of a war zone, there are moments and people that you will never forget. And my colleague Ida is one of those people. I'm going to take you back to my first contract as a project coordinator for MSF. I was going to northeast Syria. I had previous missions under my belt, but it is very different when you're in charge of medical activities and the team's security for the first time. Syria was in its 8th year of war at this point. The Northeast had been held for some years by the Kurdish with US support. MSF was present, setting up medical projects, focused at first on trauma. Areas were being taken back from ISIS control, like Raqqa City, which you might recognize the name of as the former capital of ISIS-held territory. These cities were heavily mined and civilians were severely affected as they returned to their former homes. In 2019, when I was there, Turkey was also threatening northeast Syria along the northern border due to tensions between the Turkish and the Kurdish. Due to all of this going on, I was apprehensive to do this role there, but jumping in at the deep end, I crossed the Tigris River at the informal border crossing between Iraq and Syria, and a day later, I arrived in a town on the border with Turkey called Tel Abyad, where I met my team, including my incredible assistant, Ida. So briefly, what does a project coordinator do? As a project coordinator, or PC, I'm responsible for identifying health needs and planning the medical activities with the medical team, and then ensuring these activities run in the best possible way. A PC has to represent MSF in the field, meeting all kinds of people to ensure we have permissions and to ensure the people most in need can access our services. As a PC, I'm also responsible for ensuring the project's safety through understanding the political decisions around us and analysing any threats and risks. The project in Tel Abyad included a hospital. We did surgery, we had a maternity department, paediatrics, and other specialities. We also delivered mental health care and primary healthcare services. This was in a camp for Syrians displaced from other locations in a town called Ain Issa. This camp also held detained foreign women and children accused of affiliation with ISIS. Together, Ida and I would regularly meet with military leaders and security forces. We met with Kurdish governors who were developing their own political state, intelligence agents, and medical council members. I was often very nervous, but she's so confident it somehow hid some of my nervousness. We were in some interesting and sometimes intimidating situations. I remember one day entering an intelligence official's office and he had a line of bullets increasing in size along the front of his desk and a pistol at the edge. He casually slid the pistol into his desk drawer and I looked at Ida. She nodded like we're in the right place and strode in. Day to day, we would also brief new international staff that were coming on the situation around us, which was getting louder by the day with aggression from Turkey, whose border wall was only 500 meters from our house. We would regularly hold staff meetings with our predominantly male staff We trained drivers on how to behave at checkpoints, negotiated with landlords, planned the medical activities in the hospital, collaborating with the local health authorities, and planned the activities in the camp with the detainees. But it's Ida that I want to talk about today. She has an incredible story. She's an inspiring young woman of 28, 26 at the time I worked with her. Originally from Aleppo, she was forced to leave in 2013. Aleppo was besieged, and constant, indiscriminate shelling and sniper fire was the reality for civilians. Nowhere was safe. She and her husband moved to Tel Abyad, where her husband had relatives. But once there, it wasn't long before ISIS took over the town, and living under ISIS rules was her new daily reality. Everyone around her, in order to survive, was accepting that this is how life would be. But she didn't do that. She never accepted that this is how her life would be. She kept hope. She was studying her degree, which was something to focus on, a light at the end of the tunnel, she said, despite what was going on outside. She studied locked in the downstairs of their home for over a year. It was too risky to go out, and it was risky to be seen inside studying, so the curtains were always closed. Executions, beheadings were happening daily on the roundabout just down the street. When it came for her to do her final exams, she had to cross 3 front lines, and it took 3 days to travel from Tel Abyad to Aleppo. Her request to ISIS for permission to travel was rejected, so she had to go unauthorized, planning every step and finding a route to avoid ISIS checkpoints, because if she was caught, she would have been accused of being a defector. She had to go from ISIS-held territory to that held by Kurdish forces, through the Free Syrian Army front lines to government-controlled Syria. And through all of this, she succeeded in completing her undergraduate degree in English. Not long after that, she enrolled for her master's. What she really wanted was to show female friends and family that through the tough experiences the conflict brought, it just made her stronger and more determined to draw her own path. And that she did, and I'm sure she inspired those around her. When MSF arrived back in Tel Abyad in 2000, we'd been there earlier in the war, as Tahir mentioned earlier in his story. Ida joined us then in 2017, but very quickly moved up the ranks to roles with much more responsibility. After 2 months, she was project coordinator assistant, but she was also used by the whole mission for many things, like assessing different areas, firstly into a newly liberated Raqqa in 2018, but also for research, analysis, and for briefings. By the time I reached Tel Abyad at the beginning of 2019, it was clear that Ida's aspirations were beyond that of the role that she was in, but it didn't bring complacency. She had unbelievable drive and commitment to the role, and she was faced with supporting me, which was a challenge, I'm sure, because I had a lot of questions. I learned incredible amounts from her. I would be astonished by her stories of the past years over tea and absorb as much of what she knows about Syria as I could. Ida discussed at length with me before she decided to leave MSF. She moved on to continue her professional growth at another organisation. This meant moving to a town further east along the Syrian-Turkey border called Ras Al Ain. Her leaving party was emotional for everyone. The respect that she had from the staff, pretty much all older than her, was incredible. We kept in touch regularly, and she would visit the project whenever she came back to Tel Abyad. I was out of the project for my break when the US forces finally withdrew from parts of northeast Syria, leaving Tel Abyad and the rest of the Syrian-Turkish border exceptionally vulnerable to Turkey's advances. And on the 9th of October, Turkey invaded Tel Abyad. The local people, including our staff, were forced to flee. The international staff team evacuated. After a few weeks, about half of our staff managed to return to see what was left of their homes. Both Arab and Kurdish staff had their homes looted, and some of their homes were taken over. Kurdish staff have still not been able to go home. Throughout all of this, Ida had been alone in Ras Al Ain, which was attacked at the same time. We didn't hear from her for a number of days. I was worried, but I also had no doubt she would find her way to safety. I waited, and on the 15th of October, I was relieved to get a text from her. It said, "Finally, I arrived home. It was a terrible journey. More than 500 people on the floor of the cargo plane. I spent the whole time standing on my feet. There was no oxygen. People were fainting around me, but I survived. I'm ready for what's next. This was typical Ida, facing extraordinary circumstances, but so brave. She had travelled out of Ras Al Ain during the Turkish invasion. We were in Iraq by that point, hearing of rockets being fired at convoys by Turkish-supported forces along the road. It was incredibly dangerous, but that was only the start. She had to go to the airport in another town, one which is held by the Syrian government, and then fly to the capital, Damascus, and then travel by bus to Aleppo. This is an exceptionally risky journey, regardless of the ongoing war, given that working for NGOs in opposition-held areas like the Kurdish-held northeast potentially puts you on the terrorist list of the government. NGOs like MSF are technically illegal. We work without the permission of the Syrian government. Not only had she worked for us, but she had translated for me and many others in meetings with Kurdish authorities. This connection would likely put her at even higher risk. So she was back home with her mother and children in Aleppo, but that didn't mean she was safe, as had someone found out her employment history, she was in danger of arrest and investigation. This was the most difficult time for me, I think. We were isolated from the project. I hadn't had the chance to say goodbye to any of my staff after the evacuation. And Ida as well, as she had technically left MSF, but she was still such an integral part of the mission. The new PC assistant had been in contact with her for advice through the whole evacuation from Tel Abyad. I couldn't stop thinking about her, and I felt strongly that we still had a duty of care to her, often updating the senior management about her situation. Ida managed to escape Syria herself after fearing what the government would do if she stayed. She arrived in the relative safety of Erbil, Iraq, where we were also based at that time. I was extremely relieved and happy for the mission when she rejoined our team, this time as head of mission assistant with a focus on humanitarian issues. She now manages our base in Iraq. So why has Ida made such an impression on me? She's faced unimaginable circumstances. Her drive, determination, and confidence inspires me every day in this job where we are so often exposed to circumstances that we've never been in before. She has so much warmth and humility despite everything she's been exposed to. She still helps me today when I have a challenge. After finishing my mission in 2019, working remotely from Iraq, I went to Afghanistan for most of 2020, another very tricky place to ensure our security. Ida and her level-headed attitude and critical eye for understanding conflict and security gives me someone to brainstorm with. Or she'll send me a picture of the kids back home in Aleppo and give me a welcome distraction. I will always be grateful to have met her. Thank you.
Thank you, Cara. Great, and I think we have some photos to show of Ida.
Yeah, so that was last winter in Erbil, Iraq. So that's where Ida's now based. This is Ida and I with some of the team that were working remotely from Erbil at the end of 2019. This is Ida and I in the project in Tel Abyad. We were celebrating World Thalassemia Day. We have a big program for thalassemia in Tel Abyad, and it was also my birthday. And this is Ida in her element, surrounded by maps, probably talking about the context and what's going on.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Cara. It's a really, really fascinating situation in northeastern Syria, a fascinating political situation, and so complicated. And also, yeah, wow, what an incredible colleague you had in Ida, such a strong person. Yeah, I was especially struck by, you talking about her studying in secret in her home for a year when ISIS had taken over her town. She carried on studying, even they were doing executions around the corner, and she just carried on, and then traveling for 3 days unauthorized to Aleppo through all those front lines just to sit her exams. Just, yeah, blows your mind.
Yeah.
I guess my question would be, where's Ida now? What does the future hold for Ida?
Sure. Well, it was just a couple of days ago that I had a text from her. She's still managing our office, our support office for Syria from Erbil at the moment. But last week she got the scores back. She scored highly on her speaking and written international English language test, and she is in process for her student visa to study in the UK. So she said she is hoping to go to Nottingham University and study international relations with security and development. And it was great to hear. I'll be super excited to have her close to home, and happy she's continuing on this dream and journey of her education. And I'm also super happy that her talent and her expertise will be brought to the university, and that she'll get that chance to share with others and contribute to the field of study and the field of work. So that's great.
She could come and do some events for us as well, tell her story herself.
I will.
That would be great. Okay, lovely. Well, thank you. So that brings us to the end of the storytelling section. We do have a couple of minutes now if anyone has any questions. If my speakers would all put their cameras on. But before we go into the questions, I also had Tahir wanted to speak for a moment about a very interesting project. He's writing a book about his story and had a question for you. So Tahir, if you're there, take it.
Thank you, Pam, actually, for giving me this opportunity. So following the TEDx talk that I gave, 2017, 2018, people were approaching and saying, why don't you put the whole thing into a book and write an autobiography? But I decided to go down a different path, and I was delaying the idea initially, but whenever someone hears the word Syrian nowadays, they subconsciously just connect it with the word refugee. You hear Syrian, your mind directly attaches the word refugee to it. So I've decided, instead of writing an autobiography, just write a fiction inspired by the events that we've been through, but change the impression of Syria was a beautiful country before the war. Culturally, and the geography and everything in it was quite beautiful. And not many people seem to know that. So I finished actually writing the novel, and I've sent it to a couple of editors who were happy with the end result, but I'm currently looking for beta readers just to go through it from home, to maybe read a couple of chapters, tell me anything, what they feel, how it makes them feel, before I proceed and start querying agents. So I think Pam, we were going to put the email probably in the chat.
Yeah, Tahir, if you're happy to share your email in the chat, and then if anybody's interested in reading Tahir's draft and giving feedback, then they could get in touch with Tahir directly, if that works for you, Tahir.
Yeah, I would really appreciate it. So it's not a typical historical fiction type situation. No, it's more contemporary fiction, which is focusing on relationships in Syria before the war and during the war. Just typing the email now.
Perfect, thank you. And I'm also going to share Tahir's TED Talk as well, which is a longer version of the story that he told today. So that's in the chat now. Okay, so if anybody has any questions, please put them in the chat. And in the meantime, there's one that's come up. Hold on, let me just find it. Somebody was asking about careers. Okay, this is a general question. In order to work with MSF, do we need to do additional diplomas, degrees such as tropical medicine to be eligible? I think this must be somebody who's medical. For those doctors that are still practicing in the UK and working and want to work with MSF, do they get time away from their job to do so, or do they work as locums? So is anybody here able to answer that one? How people manage their medical career? Chris, do you want to take that? Oh, you need to unmute. Can you unmute yourself? No, I can't hear him.
Now?
Yes, perfect.
Yeah, I think also Sarah is probably a good person to mention it, but also to say, because I'm not a doctor, I'm a nurse, but I mean, there's ways around it. If your organisation you work for, NHS, whoever is flexible, then of course MSF, often the contracts are quite, first time around 9 months, but after that they can be shorter, 3 months, 6 months, depending on the contact. So it depends if you have the skills and the necessary medical background, and obviously maybe tropical medicine or other experiences which are relevant, then very possible. But I think I jumped in here and suddenly remembering, of course, that Sarah is a doctor, so I'm going to stop talking and hand over to her. Sorry, Sarah.
Go ahead, Sarah.
Well, you've worked with MSF much longer than me, so you'll have much more experience of that. Most of the doctors that I worked with, as you say, Christopher, were in the fairly early stages of their training. They had been qualified for 3, 4, 5 years, so they had quite a bit of experience under their belt, but they weren't yet in substantive career jobs. They weren't yet consultants or full-time GP partners, which meant that they were able to negotiate 6 months, 9 months, a year, a couple of years out of their training. I don't know whether how receptive and sympathetic hospital trusts are to doctors who already have substantive contracts with them in taking time out. But I've certainly come across, can people hear me? Yeah, but I've certainly come across doctors who've been able to do that. And the other thing is that although, yes, I had to go away and do some training in tropical medicine, if you're a hospital specialist with a skill which is needed by MSF, then they don't necessarily need you to do the tropical medicine training. If, say, you're an orthopedic surgeon or an obstetrician, and they need you to go and teach orthopedic skills, provide an obstetric service, or teach people to do a particular procedure, then you don't need to do the training in tropical medicine. And also, although quite a lot of the posts, certainly to start off with, are quite long, they're about 9 months to start off with. Once you've done 1 or 2, then you can sort of slot in wherever they have a gap. So the last job I did was only a 3-month fill-in job, for example. I don't know if that answers your questions.
That's great. Thank you, Sarah. We have another question. To what extent do you find yourself collaborating in Syria with other medical NGOs like the Red Crescent and Red Cross, especially in conflict towns like Raqqa? Who would like to take that one?
I mean, my information on this topic is quite ancient, from 2013. But we were collaborating very well with all of the local NGOs that are working in the area, with WHO as well. And we have such level of coordination that we weren't duplicating each other's jobs. So if someone is looking after pediatrics, the other one is looking after surgery, for instance. And then if someone is looking after vaccinations and the other one wanted to do vaccinations, then we would have the discussion with each other and decide which one covers which area. But that was from 2013. I'm not sure how things, if they have changed at all since then.
Sorry, I didn't hear that, Pam. You said how is it?
So no, just if you have anything to add, but if not, then we've got Sarah who wants to contribute.
I would say it got a little bit difficult for organizations to maintain presence, including ourselves, as you could see in Tel Abyad when we had to leave multiple times. So when I was in Tel Abyad, there was no other organization there, but indeed when they are there, exactly as Taha was saying, that it's really important that we don't overlap and that we coordinate as much as possible.
Great. Sarah, anything to add on that point?
Yes, I was just going back to the interest people were showing in actually working for MSF. A lot of people make the assumption that it's doctors and nurses who work for MSF. In all of the projects that I was in, the doctors and nurses are a tiny, tiny minority. And there are an awful lot of people who have absolutely vital skills, and the whole show could not get off the road without each of them. So there'd be people who were in charge of plumbing, ensuring safe water supplies, safe toilets, people making sure that there was food that arrived, because if you can't eat, you can't work. That there were people who were employing the local staff, making sure that safe, sensible employment and locally legal employment practices were being observed. Logistical people, making sure that what was needed was being ordered and was arriving at the time when it was supposed to arrive with what they had ordered, with what they'd ordered. The telecommunications people, you know, if you can't talk to anybody, then nothing works. The engineers keeping the electricity going and the generators going. So and nothing could work unless all of those things were working. So you don't have to be a doctor or a nurse to work with MSF. You know, they take people with a huge variety of skills.
Lovely, thank you, Sarah. There's a lovely comment from Nick, who says, thank you all for your stories. This evening has reaffirmed for me the value of my support. It's a privilege to be able to do so. So thank you, Nick. If anyone else has any comments or reflections, please do also put them in the chat, as well as questions. There's a question about how can I work for MSF here in the UK? Obviously, that very much depends on your background. I mean, we have an office of about 120 people in London, obviously working remotely most of the time at the moment. And then within that, you'll have, you know, communications, fundraising, finance, advocacy, HR, etc., etc. So it very much depends on your background, but we are a support office here in London, but all those jobs will be advertised on our website. We have another question about training as a doctor. So can you work with MSF before you start specialty training as a doctor, for example, in a year out after foundation years? Sarah, any comments on that one?
They tend to like people who've got a little bit more experience under their belt. And also, if you were going to go out as a doctor without specialist training, then they would probably want you to have some extra training in tropical medicine.
I think it was, you needed 2 years of experience after F2 in any field, preferably A&E or something like that, if I'm not mistaken, if you're not a specialist.
Right.
Okay, lovely. Any more questions from anybody? If not, we can certainly draw this evening to a close. Okay, we have, how about laboratory work? Are there microbiologists, biochemists, molecular biologists?
I can say yes. My last project in Afghanistan, we had a huge hospital, 400 beds, and quite a big lab. And I don't know the details. I'm one of those non-medical people, but it was very busy. And we had a what we call a laboratory manager. She in the UK previously had worked in the NHS, but also using doing like trials and stuff like this. And she was there, and she implemented the first Urba machine that we've had in MSF to speed up some of our testing, but I don't know the details of it, but I can say yes.
Beautiful, thank you. Okay.
Yeah, I'll just echo on. Can you hear me?
Yep, go for it, Chris.
Yeah, I just echo on that, because yes, I mean, lab techs, laboratory technicians, you wouldn't often be, maybe in some higher level surgery or some other programs, you might have a higher level, but often, you know, in the Sudan, in many countries, we need people who have a laboratory background, because except when you're really out in the bush, then, you know, health centers, hospitals, I mean, they have laboratories, and we often want to support them. They could be the government laboratories, but we want to, often it's an area where we find that they can do with capacity building to really help on the diagnosis, to maybe introduce different tests they haven't had before. And so this is an area, definitely, I mean, in so many programs I've worked, you know, we have a laboratory technician, and you might be based at the capital level, but then what you'll be doing periodically, you'll be supporting training and going out to the project sites, to really see that what we're trying to introduce is implemented. So it's a very important part of the work that we do.
Lovely, thank you, Chris. So we've got a long, very thought-provoking comment from Andy Hamilton in the chat, but I might, because it is pretty long, I might let people read that at their leisure. Any other questions from anybody? Okay.
Yes, when's the next one of these talks?
Oh, thank you for the question. I think we try to do them about once a quarter. Before COVID, we were doing them in person. So we would tour around the country, around the UK, and do them in often university towns, because we would do it in collaboration with our student supporter groups. So we might do one in Leeds, then one in Edinburgh. Obviously now it's all gone online. And there are pros and cons to that, but certainly the pro is that it means that we can have people tuning in from everywhere, and more importantly, the speakers can tune in from everywhere. For example, Cara at the moment is in Uganda, in a hotel in Uganda. And yes, having a very short break before she goes back to her mission in Sudan. So we are thinking we will continue to do these online events as well as the in-person ones. So I would say about once every quarter.
And the notice is on the newsletter. That's well, thank you so much. It's been fantastic. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you for your support. So I think that, yeah, sort of neatly brings me to a close, just to say that, yeah, I hope we've shown you a wide range of the different types of work and the different types of people that support MSF. I've worked for the organisation for 6 years, which actually isn't that long in MSF terms, but I never get tired of hearing of these stories of the work that we do. But also it is very important to point out that none of this would be possible if it weren't for you. You know, we are quite unique as a charity in that almost nothing, almost a tiny percentage of donations is not private. So in other words, you know, 99 whatever it is of our donations are private individuals donating to MSF, which gives us freedom to decide where we go and what we do with your money. So none of it would be possible if it weren't for your support. So thank you so much. We're going to put a feedback form in the chat, because this is the storytelling format is quite new for us. So we would love to hear how you found that. And if you did want to make a donation, we will put the donation link in the chat as well.
Absolutely superb. Really, really excellent. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you all for coming, and enjoy the rest of your evenings.